I think my interest in storytelling and movies started very early on. My parents were producers, they owned independent movie theaters, and in one of those theaters one day, I went to see a movie called Mary Poppins. And that movie allowed me to escape the outside world of New York City and go to this magical place where I got to see someone draw chalk on a concrete and that world come to life, and I will always remember that. Then, my parents illustrated to me the power of storytelling as I began to understand some of the movies that they had produced, whether it be movies like The Pawnbroker that dealt with issues of the Holocaust, or King, a film record, Montgomery to Memphis, that dealt with the civil rights movement. I saw the power of storytelling. Hi, I'm Jon Landau, and this is the Storytellers Spotlight. When my parents decided to produce a documentary about the late Martin Luther King, which is this was in the early 1970s, it was really the first time that my eyes opened to the power that a movie could bring to a global audience. And what they wanted to do was to reveal the story behind the man, what had gone through, not just through Martin Luther King, but through the whole civil rights movement. And he was the lens into that. And I saw the impact that it had on people who had not been exposed to any of the atrocities that had gone on in society, and how it, opened their eyes to what was going on, and hopefully they lived their lives differently after seeing the movie. And if a movie can do that, it's something amazing.
Listen to me, I've got you. I won't let go.
The deeper I got into understanding what films were and the impact that I could have in telling a story, even Titanic. Titanic, to me, why does it resonate? It resonates because it gives people the idea that bigger is not necessarily better. And it showcases that even in a tragic moment, no matter how desperate the situation is, that life can be better ahead. And that's the story of Rose. Rose lost the love of her life in the frigid waters of the Atlantic. But she goes on to live a full and rich life, and that's what the end of the movie shows. And it's a reminder to people in the theater, no matter what bills they might have at home, what call they got from a doctor, what fight their child got into on a playground, there can be better days ahead, and they just have to look for them. What excited me most about Avatar, when I first read Jim's initial scriptment for it, wasn't even a full script, it was 1995, well before we ever started production. The technology didn't exist to tell the story, but what I saw in that story was a story about people fighting back against an oppressor coming in. I think the true heart of The Way of Water continues and builds off of the first film. The first film was a love story. Now it's about family. It's about what do you do to keep your family together, the sacrifices you make as a father, the adjustments you make as a child. And it's set against the same backdrop of imperial forces coming in and invading and fighting back for what's right. One of my favorite anecdotes coming out of Avatar is an email that I received from the sub-distributor in Ukraine, who said to me, "Jon, Avatar Way of Water is going to become the #1 film of all time in Ukraine. When the bombs are not dropping, air raid sirens are silent, people then come out and they go to see Avatar Way of Water because it's a story that they identify with. It's a story that gives them hope to see the underdog fighting back against forces that have better weapons, more military, and surviving, all told through the story of a family. This gives the Ukraine people hope, and they go to see the movie. And, for me, what more can you ask for as a filmmaker than to hear a story like that?
I see you.
I see you.
When people ask me, do I have a favorite character or a creature in the film, I say to them, do you have a favorite child? It's very hard to pick a favorite because each one represents something different. I think in the character of Loak, a child who is living in the shadow of his father. How many of us have lived in the shadow of our parents and not understanding how they're parenting us? I see Kiri, a teenage girl struggling to find her own identity in life. How many young men and women are struggling to find their own identity as teenagers? And in Jake and Neytiri, what are the lengths you go to protect your children? You know, one of the things that is really interesting is that neither Sam Worthington or Zoe Saldana had children when we made the first Avatar. They both had children when we were making this story about family. And it changed their perspective on how to play those parts because of what it means to protect your child.
Strong heart.
In Avatar, we have a saying, Inate Kameya, I see you.
I see you.
And I think it means seeing someone for who they really are on the inside, not who they are on the outside. And, you know, I think that's the important thing about everything that we do, is to see people and recognize them as the individual that they are. One of the really touching moments that I remember from the Avatar production was Cliff Curtis, a Maori actor who plays Tanawari. He was doing performance capture with us in Los Angeles. He wasn't going to be needed for the live action filming, but he asked me if he could come with his family to give us a blessing on our first day of live action filming. I said, of course, that would be wonderful. And Cliff showed up, not with a family of 5, but with his whole community of about 43 people. They had taken an 8-hour bus ride and performed a blessing, a haka, and gave Jim and myself gifts. And Cliff gave me a hand-carved oar, and he said, this is to steer the ship. And that was Cliff bringing his culture to our film, and I still have that oar hanging in my office. You gave us this gift today, so Cliff, your family, thank you all very, very, very much. We came into New Zealand right after the pandemic shut down. Nothing was happening. We came in and we invigorated an economy by going out to the local stationery store, the hotels and housing people, the acting community that was not working, the stunt people who were not working, and gave them an opportunity to work and instill new vigor in the economy there. You know, I think one of the things that people don't realize is the impact that a film has on the local community. We are not a widget company where all of our spending is in a very narrow corridor. Our spending is extremely diverse. We sit there and we'll cater for 400 people a day on the set, and we go out to the local market and buy all of our produce locally. We are helping the farmers, we are helping the community there. I also want to point out that we try to do it with a social responsibility where, you know, we are providing one meal a day that is all plant-based for our live action crew. Here in Los Angeles, we did all of our meals as plant-based because we can't just talk the talk, we have to walk the walk. The movie ends the same way the first movie did, with Jake Sully opening his eyes. And I view that as a challenge to people, to recognize that their actions have an impact on people around them and the world around them. Look, I think society needs to wake up and understand we are all one. As we talk about in Avatar, we are all connected. And there are people that have not been given opportunities. And we strive to create opportunities, what we do on our films, both in front of the camera and behind the camera, to create the most diverse crew and cast that we possibly can. Bridget York, our producer down in New Zealand, she created a phenomenal internship program where we had 36 internships with a tremendously diverse populace, women, culturally, everywhere. And for us, I think it's a responsibility that we have to train people so that ultimately their stories that inspire them can be told on the big screen. What I wanted for audiences coming away from Way of Water was a sense that inside of them is the ability to make a difference.